Good evening. Thanks so much for coming to our face-to-face lecture this evening. I'm Dr. Lisa Homa. Tonight we're going to talk about several issues. I'll be presenting two PowerPoints. The first one, we're going to talk about legal issues in nursing, and this will follow along with your text readings pretty closely. And the second lecture is going to be about holistic comfort theory. So first, I'd like to share, before I start the legal issues in nursing, that I'm a legal nurse consultant. I've had my own practice since 2008, and I've been doing cases in complex medical malpractice called MedMal and catastrophic personal injury for almost 13 years. I'll be covering the readings in the text, but I also want to share my insights and observations that I've encountered over the years so that you can avoid depositions and lawsuits. The objectives for this lecture, we're going to skip over them. They pertain to the other lectures that are in the course for this week. So we're going to just keep moving, and we're going to focus on laws. And so the laws that we're going to focus on are the only laws that impact nursing care. Laws are put into place to protect the public and our society and to prevent and punish crimes. So all laws that are created in our society all come from the Constitution. The Constitution provides the recipes for both the federal and state agencies, and then the police powers, most frequently called police law, talks about essentially code of conduct. So when we think about police, we think they manage and navigate behaviors. A police power is really a code of conduct. The most favorite code of conduct for us in nurses is the ANA's Nurses Code of Ethics. There's 9 provisions to that. We're going to talk more about that when you get to safety strategies in the next course. Then I'm going to move to statutory law. Statutory law, they are the laws that are created from our elected officials. There's 2 types of statutory law. The first comes from state and territorial legislators. They are set up enabling statutes. One would be like in Pennsylvania, our Nurse Practice Act. That is the most important law that we have in the state of Pennsylvania. They basically frame out what power and authority the State Board of Nursing has and how they can manage it and what actions they can take. The second form of statutory law, it comes from our legislative bodies. An example of this, so they regulate aspects of healthcare. So the popular one is the Americans with Disability Act. And also we think about it, who determines our scope of practice for nurse practitioners? And one really groundbreaking legislature decision is when nurse practitioners were given the ability to finally prescribe medications. We're going to review a couple legal terms. An advance directive, I hope you have an advance directive, nurses. It's a document made by an individual to establish desired health care. So basically you become the decision maker for someone if they become incapacitated. There are certain types of them. We use a living will or a durable power of attorney for health care. If you don't have one, you need to put it on your to-do list. It's really important to have that. Second key term is defamation. And this is talking smack about somebody, and essentially because you said that about them, it has created something in their profession. Either they can't get a job, they've been blackballed for it. Anyway, it's a civil wrong, hurts someone's reputation, and then they sue because of it. The defendant is just the person who's accused of the wrongdoing. A deposition, attorneys shorten this or abbreviate and call it DEPS. DEPS. It can be a video deps where you are recorded and videotaped your testimony. Any deposition, you have to be sworn in under oath, and a court reporter will transcribe what you said so that it can be reviewed by both sides. We can also use deposition to be informational, and that's not always a punitive or consequential act of something that a nurse did. And let me give you an example. I've been depositioned as part of a code team. It can be informationally seeking. In a more formal method, if the situation was very complex and maybe people, different healthcare disciplines are pointing the finger at each other, sometimes it's important just to bring in like the code team for an example and put them under oath and then try to do some fact finding to find out what really happened. And in my case, I was the recorder in a code of a woman who had HELLP syndrome and she passed away. They delivered the baby at the bedside. We coded her forever. It was just very hard for the family to accept. So nothing ever came out of it. We're never accused of anything, but just know that sometimes those things happen. And then a diversional program, I don't know a lot about them in my experience, but I can tell you that it's usually because a nurse has been accused of being an impaired provider. What we use in Pennsylvania for that is called PNAP. It's a program that any nurse who has a substance abuse issue or something of that nature, they have to complete and participate in that program. And it's pretty aggressive. They have to be random drug tests to make sure that the nurse continues with an unrestricted nursing license. And then an expert witness is just a person who has special skills or knowledge in an area area of expertise that an average citizen does not. And in this case, we're talking about a nurse expert witness. And this is a person, in order to start a lawsuit in many states that surround Pennsylvania, the nurse has to sign an affidavit of merit to start the lawsuit, saying that in fact the nurse who's being accused of something has or breached the standard of care. I'll explain that in just a minute. So of the key terms that are on the screen, I'm kind of go out of order. This is the order that it appeared in the text, so I listed it that way, but I want to talk about reasonable care first. Reasonable care is the degree of care that any reasonable and prudent nurse would use under same or similar circumstances. And let me give you an example. So let's say you have a friend, you graduated from nursing school, so you got all the same training and you happen to work in the same institution after graduation, and a hurricane comes. And this is like the actions that you follow as a nurse. So if you put 500 nurses in that same situation, would they all perform care probably in a similar manner? And generally the answer is yes. So I'm going to skip a little bit. I'm going to go to the third term down, which is negligence. Negligence is failure to provide reasonable or ordinary care. Nurses can be accused of negligence and they can be accused of malpractice. So now I'm going to back up again on up to the first one, which is standard of care, and it's complicated. So earlier in the lecture, we talked about influences, our regulatory and our legal influences, right? All the different kinds of laws. Let's say I work in acute care and I wanted to know the standard of care on delivering a baby. So let's just say I looked up on the hospital intranet all the resources and I wanted to know the standard of care on how we do something. You will never find it. So the standard of care, which I always found so darn confusing, was never presented well to me in nursing school, essentially says it looks at all the bodies of evidence, looks at statutory laws, the Nurse Practice Act, it looks at hospital policies and procedures. It looks at all those things. And basically, a nurse expert will look at all those authoritative journals and things that describe what the care should be like for a patient, let's say giving birth. And they'll look at all of those aspects and determine, okay, the nurse taking care of that patient, did they fall below the minimum standard of care? And that is essentially will become a medical malpractice case. So the burden really comes to, so the next term down after malpractice is plaintiff. And so the plaintiff is the person who is representing the injured party. And the plaintiff in a medical malpractice case has the burden to prove 4 tiers to win the case. And so the first one is they have to prove that the nurse had duty to provide the care in the first place. Let's say you were the primary nurse assigned to the patient. They next have to prove that you breached the standard of care, meaning you broke the rules and your care was below the minimum standard of care. The third tier of it is to prove that as a result of this breach, the patient suffered damages, and they have to prove that the damage was caused because of your action. So really all the defense has to do is just muddy the water enough to make it seem like nothing really happened. So anyway, the burden truly is on the plaintiff in order to prove their case. And then jurisdiction is just a judge presiding over a certain case. So the court's authority, they can decide, hey, I could send this to a jury trial, or no, I'm going to just decide this right here. It goes no further. Some states function that way, so I'm just mentioning the term, and again, it was mentioned in your text. Good Samaritan law it protects anyone. If you see somebody who's in the midst of an emergency, if you perform terrible care and something happens to that, you're trying to save someone's life, so you're not going to be held accountable. And then a tort is just a civil wrong. So there's criminal court, like you break a law and then you're taken to court. And then there's civil, meaning, hey, buddy, you did something terrible to me and now I want you to repay that. And we're going to talk about examples of that in just a minute. And then regulatory law are laws passed at the state level from our state board of nursing, for example. And I never really understood this. So administrative law, like if we look up the PA code in the Nurse Practice Act, section 49, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. And examples would be like, how often do we renew our RN license in Pennsylvania? What happens if I breach below the standard of care, and it outlines the authority and what you have to do to maintain your license and things of that nature. In safety strategies, we're going to really dive really hard into this because there's so much to know, and we want you to be comfortable how you practice and where you practice. We're going to spend a lot of time, again, going through all the different things and how our PA Nurse Practice Act is slightly different than other states. Nurses in PA are not allowed to delegate at all. And then I wanted to review a couple things about protecting yourself as a nurse. And so I put up like the most common ways you can protect, and then I'm going to share with you some insights on where I have seen it in my own practice. And then the next slide on intentional torts, the book goes over the most common cases they've seen, although I have to share and say I've never, in all my years of practice, I've never seen those intentional torts occur. First way to protect yourself is make sure you keep up with your continuing education Stay current, stay competent, stay relevant. Want to make sure that however you're treating a patient, you are using evidence-based care to reflect. The second bullet is kind of crazy, and the research says kill your patient with kindness, literally. There's research to suggest that if you are nice to your patient and you build a strong patient-nurse relationship, which is the definition of patient-centered care, which is one of the CUSIN competencies, that even if you commit negligence or malpractice to that patient, because you built that relationship, they're more likely not to sue you. It's pretty crazy, right? And then become familiar with the Nurse Practice Act. So most of us we're happy to get out of school and do our thing and learn how to practice so that we could come off orientation and do our own thing. But we've never really been taught on what's important to know about the Nurse Practice Act. And again, we're going to dive into that in safety strategy. And then we want you to practice within the scope of your practice. Case in point is we really can't delegate, and we'll talk about it later. That is one area as an RN in Pennsylvania that you have to be very careful, because if you do that, then you're practicing out of your scope. And then knowing your self-reporting laws are like our state mandated reporting laws. So if we suspect child abuse, we have to report that, or we can be disciplined if we fail to do that. And then have professional licensure defense insurance. And I'm going to really dive into that in just a few minutes on another slide. Areas where I have observed where nurses get into trouble in lawsuits is nurses fail to notify abnormal findings. They fail to call the doctor. Patient had a SATA 90 for 5 hours and nurse did not ever call that. So they didn't follow the hospital policy. They never called that to the provider. Another thing I've seen far too many times, and it's really concerning, is that nurses assess incorrectly. I've seen them think that they've mistaken a nursing diagnosis to be something, they think it's less serious than it actually really is, and the patient really turned out to be very, very sick. And let me give you an example of that. I had a case that went to trial where the patient was tachycardic on a med-surg floor for 5 days, had a heart rate with bursts going into the 140s, and nobody was concerned about it. They just said, Mr. Smith has been tachycardic for 4 days, that's normal baseline. Here come to find that the patient had a peritonitis that was brewing, they were septic, and ended up going into septic shock and almost dying on day 4 because nobody called it, nobody interpreted that as something more serious, and the patient really almost died. And then failure to do something, and let me explain what that means, is your patient had a neurochange, you failed to call a brain attack. Your patient was at a very, very high risk, exponential risk of developing a blood clot, and you didn't apply a sequential device, things like that. And then I want to talk about, it's not on a slide, so I'm just going to tell you quick, who's more likely to sue. So your best strategy in avoiding a lawsuit yourself as a nurse is to identify the most litigious people, meaning the people who are sue happy. And this may not be a surprise, so it's been identified that wealthy patients are more likely to sue than people with lower income. They just don't have the money to go after cases like that. Also, people in the medical field or have legal connections, they're more critical of one another. So if, like, let's say you're a nurse and your kid suffered an injury, you're going to be more likely to go after them because you'll be critical of that care. And then this is not surprising, but how about that demanding, hard to satisfy patient who says they've been mistreated and, they're just very difficult to satisfy. They're much more litigious. And then people who come in and they demand certain things. So they'll tell a surgeon, you're going to do this procedure. That's an automatic red flag. And they're going to say, and I want you to do it this way and that way. And they're going to be people that will be more likely to sue. And then also if you're a person who, let's say you were in a practice with someone together and you ended up suing your coworker, that person's more litigious as well. And then intentional torts. The book says these are the most important ones that nurses are cited for, and I 100% disagree. And I can also tell you that I think I've broken every single one of them. I should be in court. And so let me explain. So false imprisonment, that little geriatric patient that you put in a geri chair, it's confining someone to a space, they're in a bound area, and they are unable to get themselves out of it. I know 1000% in ICU. I've done that hundreds of times. Guilty as charged. Assault and battery, let me give you that. So I worked in neurotrauma for a really, really long time in ICU. And I know I've committed this. So how about the drunk trauma that comes in, that's spitting at people, that's kicking, is combative, is, ripping at things. You can't reason with them. And then you give that warning. You give them the verbal warning and say, or you try to get consent to them and say, Mr. Smith, you're, whatever, you have blah, blah, blah injury, and we'd like to put an IV in to continue your care. And they say, no, and they're spitting at you and they're kicking. Here's what I've done as a really good nurse is I said, oh, really? Not only am I going to put that big IV in your arm, I'm going to probably choose a 16 instead of an 18 because you just kicked me. I'm going to commit assault. So if I threaten that I'm going to put the IV in, that's assault. And if I actually carry it out and I put the IV in, that's assault and battery. I've done that many, many, many times also. So definitely not nurse of the year there either. An invasion of privacy is like, for example, in front of your family, let's say you're with your mother, and in front of the doctor comes in and says, hey, I'm going to share these test results, and they don't ask your family member with you, if you're the patient, if they can tell the results or share those results with the two of you or whoever is in the room. That's an invasion of privacy. A breach of privacy, however, it's not only just that, it's also where it can create a privacy and security issue about it also. And an example of that is in Pennsylvania, if your child to, let's say, see a psychologist before age 18, it requires a signature on both parents. So if you're divorced, you still have to get a signature from both sides. So if a psychologist said, oh, I'm just going to tell parent B about it without the other person knowing about it, which it wouldn't happen, but I'm just giving a hypothetical. I can't think of anything else right at this moment. But if they shared that information despite all that, that would be a significant breach of privacy. And then confidentiality is just a set of rules that limits information. And we know about HIPAA. Nurses are overwhelmed with HIPAA all the time. So we're just going to keep moving. And then what do I do if I'm accused of negligence? You need to contact your professional. Hopefully you have medical malpractice insurance. We're going to talk about that next. You would notify your insurance carrier, and you have to let the State Board of Nursing know that there could be an infraction or something coming against, like you didn't follow the Nurse Practice Act. Again, we already beat this up a lot with the plaintiff has to prove that you breached the standard of care. And then we talked about common patient complaints already, like how nurses get into lawsuits. So we'll keep moving past that. Okay, so let me just talk about the liability of things. Any healthcare facility is liable for all of its staff and the actions of their staff. Let's say in an acute care setting, you're a staff nurse working on the floor, and staffing, it's so completely unsafe. So you call your charge nurse and tell them, hey, this is really unsafe. Something bad's going to happen here. It's up to the duty of your charge nurse to escalate that to the house supervisor and say, listen, we have significant problems. We have safety issues. It's unsafe staffing, and we need to do this. If, let's say, your charge nurse or your nurse supervisor failed to escalate that to a higher body through the chain of command, they can be liable. The institutional liability, I already mentioned that they are responsible for everybody in the ship, essentially. And then even student nurses can be liable. So that's why it's important to have medical malpractice insurance, because you just never know what could happen. And then I just want to talk about your medical malpractice insurance for a second. So you should carry a minimum of $1 million/$6 million for your policy. And all the $1 million means is that on one occurrence, like let's say you're having the worst year of your life and you were accused of medical malpractice 2 times in that calendar year. The most that on the $1 million portion of the policy means they can't draw any more than $1 million from that first occurrence. If you happen to have that second unlucky medical malpractice experience that happened during that year, the $6 million is they can't pull any more than that throughout the entire calendar year. So if you were accused a third time, there's nothing left for you. You're done. And then I wanted to mention medical malpractice defense insurance. If you're accused of medical malpractice or negligence, the hospital, if kind of the whole team has been accused of something, the hospital will probably cover you and your team with an attorney. But if you are the only person on the team who's been accused of something, it's more than likely that you will have to provide your own defense insurance. So you have to pay for your attorney, and they're really expensive per hour. And you'll also have to, for all the days you have to be in court and everything else, you have to pay for lost wages and things of that nature. So bottom line is buyer beware. Whatever kind of medical malpractice you get for yourself, you want to ensure that it has this feature to it. The other thing to determine is your responsibility. If you're fortunate enough to have a lot of assets, then you may need more insurance than $1 million or $6 million. You may need a higher policy than that. And the other thing that would determine how much you take out on your insurance would be, let's say, for example, the more responsibility you have as a nurse would cause you to have a higher insurance policy. And that's it. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your day.